My wife refuses to take her allergies seriously, so I kicked her out after she had another close call to show her that her actions have consequences. Posted by you/perfect_track_3647. Last night, my 33M wife, 33F, came home from work and pulled out a container of something I wasn't familiar with and sat down to eat. She works at a grocery store, so I normally don't think too much about it, but when I got a whiff of it, it smelled like crab salad. Now for context, my wife has a pretty intense allergy to green and red onions but is fine with yellow and white onions. In America, we do have ingredients listed on packages as required by law. However, companies are allowed to be vague with certain ingredients, and onions are one of those. Normally, if I spot onions listed as an ingredient, it's a hard pass for me, I don't even chance it. My wife, however, doesn't follow the same rule. Back to last night, I got up and asked to see the container, which was half gone at this point, and read the ingredient list. Onions, plain as day, were listed toward the top of the ingredients. I asked her if she had bothered to read the ingredients, and she said she had but assumed they were the safe ones. At this point, I grabbed the EpiPen from her purse, which, I feel the need to add, she only started carrying, along with Benadryl, because I badgered her for a couple of years about it when we started dating, and kept it close by. I was upset because I used to work in a kitchen, and I know full well that green onions and seafood are almost inseparable in those salads, but I kept a calm demeanor and just watched her. Within a few minutes, she started having a reaction. At first, I wanted to give her the EpiPen because she had eaten so much, but she refused and said she would just take some Benadryl and lay down on the couch. Eventually, she needed to be given the EpiPen, and I drove her to the ER. Keep in mind, this was taking place at about 12 a.m., and I had to work at 8 a.m. We got to the ER, and they admitted her. The doctors told me that she needed to stay overnight for observation because of how severe her reaction was. I spoke with my wife about it. We know the staff there pretty well, and I knew she was in good hands, so I checked with her to see if she would be okay if I went home to get some sleep before work. She said it would be totally fine. However, as I was leaving, I chose to call her mom and ask if my wife could spend the next couple of days at her house. You see, I was furious with her at that moment because I felt like I was the only one who took her allergies seriously, and I'm not even the one who could literally die from eating the wrong onions. This isn't the first time she has been careless and ended up needing to go to the hospital because of a reaction. There have been many times before when she just ate first and asked questions later, and it frustrates me to no end that she doesn't take a few moments to read the ingredients and avoid onions she cannot plainly identify. Since I wasn't getting through to her, and the hospital visits seemed to make no difference, I decided that having her stay at her mother's house for a few days might send the message. I got home, packed her a suitcase for the next few days, and when I got the call that she was being discharged at 7 a.m., I picked her up and drove her to her mother's house. I told her as I was dropping her off that this wasn't permanent, but I needed a couple of days to cool down, and she needed to be monitored anyway since she had just gotten out of the hospital. I felt this was the best course of action. She cried a lot and begged me to take her home instead, but I refused to budge. Her mom brought her inside, and I told her that I would be blocking my wife's calls for the day while at work, so if there was an emergency, she would need to contact me through her mom. Her mom agreed and told me that this was probably the best idea since she was just as frustrated that her daughter didn't seem to take this seriously. So here I am now, at work and feeling like I might be overreacting by kicking her out for the next few days. Did I? Edit. So, I realized after reading a few responses that I might seem a little heartless here, so I want to clear a few things up. I am only blocking her calls during work because it's a double shift, and I need to be fully attentive to my job. Since I didn't get any sleep, it's going to be challenging enough as it is. If something serious happens, her mother can and will call me. Second, I packed her favorite things and I'm having her favorite dinner sent to her mom's house tonight, so she is well cared for and not just being abandoned. I would never just abandon her, and my frustration comes from a fear of losing her to something as avoidable as an allergic reaction. I also picked up an additional shift for tomorrow to make up for the time she's missing from work, so she won't have to worry about the lost hours. I am and will always support her, but this is somewhat of an intervention for her as well. Update 8 days later. It's been a wild week, but I finally have the time to sit down and update you all on what's been going on. After dropping her off at her mother's house last week, she actually started having a secondary reaction and had to return to the hospital for observation. They kept her overnight and closely monitored her to make sure she wasn't getting worse. I visited her after work, and we talked for a long while about everything. She immediately apologized to me for everything that had happened and opened up about what's been going on. My wife has been struggling a lot mentally. She tends to get sick easily, and up until a couple of years ago, she was dealing with gastroparesis, so for a long time, she was chronically ill. But as soon as she cleared one hurdle, another would pop up, and she would struggle again. Over the past few weeks, she's been struggling a lot with feeling like she isn't in control of her life. She was let go from her last 2 jobs because of downsizing, and so this was like a minor form of rebellion. Normally, if she has a reaction, she can take some Benadryl and be okay. She told me she thought this would be the same. I reminded her that the past few times, we had to go to the ER, and she told me she had forgotten about those incidents. She looked genuinely shocked that she couldn't remember them, so I believe she didn't. We spoke with a mental health specialist, and she told us she felt confident my wife wasn't suicidal but that she was dealing with a lot. She reminded her that she needs to talk about what's going on. My wife acknowledged this and promised to do better. She was discharged and sent home with a short-term prescription for some steroids to help, and I took her back home. The next couple of days were hard for her. The steroids made her feel miserable, and she repeatedly told me that this was definitely the worst she had felt in a long time. I sympathized but also reminded her that this was pretty avoidable. She made a commitment to be more careful, and later, I could see that she was serious. We went out to shop for Thanksgiving, as we were still planning to host before all this happened, and when I tell you that watching my wife meticulously reading each ingredient label almost made me cry, I mean it. My wife isn't the kind of person to make empty promises, but seeing her actually being proactive made me so happy inside. When we passed the seafood section, she flipped off the crabs, and I laughed harder than I have in a long time. Thanksgiving came and went with no problems, and honestly, I noticed my wife seemed a lot happier than she had been. When I mentioned this after dinner, she admitted that she felt like a large weight had been lifted off her shoulders after our talk in the hospital about her mental state. She felt silly for keeping all of her worries inside for so long. I ended up showing her my post, and she was actually receptive to it. She did mention that some of the commenters were a little mean and that the one about me getting a vasectomy was hilariously unhinged, but overall, she was a good sport. So we are doing well overall now. We want to thank everyone who reached out and all the commenters who were genuinely trying to be helpful. You were a source of grounding for me when things were spiraling out of control.